Hey, I'm Aaron, and this is the first episode of the relaunch of Rainbow Players NeuroRainbow cast from the NeuroRainbow project. Welcome to this relaunched YouTube video channel and the new podcasts series, the NeuroRainbow cast, now on YouTube and the video platforms coming soon, like Facebook Watch. Starting with the best of the interviews that the NeuroRainbow cast has done so far. And you'll be able to able to listen to some of the past interviews, including this one, if you go and subscribe or already subscribed to the podcast feed across podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible if you want to listen to the podcast. If you want to find that, you just search the NeuroRainbow cast podcast feed with more exciting video content to come across this YouTube, TikTok, Facebook Watch and Instagram channel. You may have noticed that some of the clips from this interview and some of Sarah Rose Gibbs' interview has been said online on TikTok and Instagram. So if you want to get some of the tasters of the interviews and the content that I'm going to share on this channel and some of the exclusive stuff like doing some live streams, go and subscribe and follow at NeuroRainbow Project and also Queer Rainbow Project on TikTok and Instagram if you want to keep up with the platform, and of course with threads, keeping up to date with the latest updates from the podcast and any additional content. And with this episode is the Jessica Espinette interview. You may have already been able to listen to or watch if you subscribed to this channel and the podcast feed before. This interview now, it's coming with dyslexia friendly subtitling to make sure it's accessible for those with deaf, hard of hearing and who want able to easy to follow content that is audio, that is subtitled, accessible for people with audio processing difficulties. And so Jessica Espin with this interview that was released early on in this year, we talk about her TikTok video as a TikTok video creator, her dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD and autism, as well as her experiences of living with chronic illnesses such as interstitial cystitis and endometriosis. To warn you that this video contains references to self-injurious meltdowns, mental health trauma, and references to suicidal ideation. Some stuff that I understand some people find triggering, just to warn you. Join in the conversation and make sure you share this video to make sure more people are able to watch this video. You can join in the conversation in the comment section below or follow across social media at NeuroRainbow Project. Tag and visit the account or use the hashtag NeuroRainbowcast on social media channels and visit www.neurorainbowproject.com. And if you want to email me, it's NeuroRainbow at neurorainbowproject.com. So if you have any issues with this video, any ideas for more content, just hit that up and I say make sure you subscribe to this channel. And thank you for listening to this introduction. And with that, let's get to the interview. Right, as said. So feel free to start to introduce yourself.
So what should I say? I'm Jess. I'm 29, live in London. I'm originally from Bristol. I guess the whole point of me being here is to talk about being neurodivergent. So I'll go in order of like my diagnoses.
Yeah.
Dyslexic, dyspraxic, ADHD, autistic, and I also have two chronic illnesses, endometriosis and interstitial cystitis, again in order of my diagnoses, not in order of which impacts me the most, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So what I normally tend to start off with the podcast is by getting a chance for the people on who I'm chatting to like start where they got their diagnosis from and like how the conditions affect you.
Yeah. So I mean, I was very late in terms of getting diagnosed, officially diagnosed. I didn't get diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia until I was in sixth form. So I was 17 or 18 when I was diagnosed. And then when I was diagnosed with ADHD, that was when I was about 20 or 21. It was my second year of university, but I went to uni later than most people do. I didn't go at 18. And then autism about just over a year ago. I say that, but when I was diagnosed with ADHD, the woman who was doing my diagnosis did say to me, I can't diagnose you with autism because this isn't an autism assessment, but my professional opinion is that you are autistic, and advised me to pursue a diagnosis. But at which point, I was still very uneducated in terms of what autism is. There was definitely a lot of internalized ableism, and at the time I didn't believe it, or I didn't want to believe it, and I was definitely in denial for a long time. It wasn't the first time someone had told me that they thought I was autistic. I had people say it to me throughout my life, but as I say, there was a lot of ableism and internalized ableism that I definitely had to overcome and educate myself really in order to accept it and to be able to really embrace who I am officially.
Yeah.
Or officially who I am, the person I am.
As you said, like it can take a while to get to the autism diagnosis, especially in people who are women and girls and, as I say, single female at birth. So, as you say, that it was only until like within the last year that you kind of clicked on and realized you were autistic. So, what was it like when the person who was diagnosed and you with ADHD turns around at the end of the interview or the assessment even, and said, I think you could possibly have autism and maybe that's something you want to pursue?
I mean, she didn't even say possibly. She was quite definitive in it, which I thought at the time was hilarious. There's absolutely no way that I'm autistic. And it had kind of been this like running thing where people had told me or asked me if I was autistic, and I just always thought it was funny, and I just thought it was this joke, which again, there's a part of me that's really ashamed to say these things, but I think it's really important to be open and honest about it, because I'm sure there are other people that are in the same position that I was, and will be. And I think like removing that embarrassment and actually talking about those feelings are really like important, because it is definitely a journey that you go on, and there's so many misconceptions and stereotypes, and some people fit those stereotypes, and that's absolutely fine, but those stereotypes I think really prevent a lot of people from getting a diagnosis, understanding and getting support.
I say that, like those stereotypes are quite impactful, and I guess because, like it didn't see much representation of women and girls, who are autistic before you got diagnosed, and, like I guess you clicked on that, maybe like they're onto something. I guess that impacted you of thinking, right, I need to get diagnosed. So were the people before you got your autism diagnosis, and before, when you, like you said, you kind of just laughed it off, thought you were autistic. And what was the moment when you thought, maybe I need to take this seriously?
So the moment it was, my sisters kind of had a little bit of an intervention. So one of my sisters, she works with young people. She works, at this time she was working within a school specifically with children that had educational needs, and kind of a bit wider to that, so there were behavioural difficulties in there, but it was very broad, but specifically she worked with autistic children. My other sister, she is a researcher, a science researcher. She's a scientist, doctor. I don't want to do a disservice to her
Yeah.
her job, but yeah. So I'd really struggled my entire life. Obviously, they'd witnessed it. My family had witnessed it, and then the pandemic came about, and like my life changed for the better. And I know it's awful to say, and I feel really guilty, and I'm not dismissing at all how horrendous the pandemic is for most people, but for me, all of the things that I'd been struggling with were no longer as heightened. And I think what was a really key acknowledgement for me was, prior to the pandemic, I'd got myself so burnt out on a regular basis. I would be so low, I would have meltdowns. I got to the point where I was feeling, often feeling like so depressed that I'd be thinking about, not wanting to be here. And then the pandemic happened and I didn't have those feelings anymore. But I wasn't really able to put like the two and two together until, I think it must have been after like the first lockdown had ended, and people started to kind of go a little bit back to normal, and I started to have those feelings again. Now, the commute was getting busier, I was having to socialize more, places were busier, and I was having sensory overload. But at the time prior, I hadn't understood or been able to put like a term on these things. I hadn't recognized before that it was like the impact of socializing. I hadn't really reflected on, I thought a lot of the things that I'd done were things that everybody did. So for example, like in work, I would rehearse conversations before I'd have a meeting, or on my way to work, I would rehearse conversations. I'd practice things in the mirror if I knew I was going to be having a conversation with a specific person, practicing my facial expressions. And then I'd get to work and I'll be communicating with people, and I'll be thinking about everything from my facial expressions to my tone of voice to my body language. I would stim, and I didn't realize what stimming was, but I've always stimmed, and I was conscious that I did it, and I would try and hide it. So I was so much less productive because I would be constantly trying to think about a million things rather than just like taking in the meeting or the conversation and trying to retain that information, and it was much harder. So as we when we moved online, I didn't have to worry about those things anymore. I could see my facial expression on the camera, so I wasn't as conscious of it. I was able to kind of practice in the space of my own home. And then other people would say, my partner or housemates would be like, what are you doing? Why are you rehearsing, or why are you talking to yourself? And I didn't think it was an odd or different thing to do. So it kind of made me start to reflect on that. And then as, like I say, things went back to normal, it really hit me, because I'd really struggled, and then I hadn't struggled for so long during that pandemic period. It hit me like 10 times harder.
Yeah.
And I think before I'd kind of accepted I struggle, and I just thought I would have to live like that always. But then because I experienced the other side of life during the pandemic where I wasn't struggling, I really didn't want to feel like that anymore. So I was having conversations with my sisters, and they didn't say it to me initially, but they had conversations amongst themselves and said that they thought that I was autistic. And then I had a conversation with my mum, and funnily enough, my mum, who's a nurse, and she's always worked pretty much within the same trust my whole life, most of my life anyway. So I know her colleagues very well. They're not just colleagues, they're friends. Yeah. And they said to my mum that they'd thought I was, and they had thought I was for a long time. And these are people that are qualified in, giving diagnoses. One of the people that said it actually has an autistic child themselves. So at that point they spoke to my mum, and my mum had spoke to other people, and you know, there were all of these different people that were saying it.
Yeah.
My partner had said it to me for a long time. He'd said to me that he thought I was autistic, and again, I'd not wanted to, you know, I'd always taken it as it being an insult, like, no, I'm not autistic. But then, you know, when you're hearing it from people from so many different aspects of your life and that know you in so many different kind of capacities, I started to think, actually, maybe there is something in this, because it's not just coming from someone that I live with or someone that knows me really well, you know,
Yeah.
it's coming from so many different people.
Yeah, so it does seem quite something interesting, and that it seemed like you was the only one, you was like kind of last person of the people around you that thought, that kind of actually clicked on and thought, well, I am autistic. And as you say that, because I guess ableist hopes or ableist view of what you perceived as autism until the point where you started to get a diagnosis and look into things for yourself. As you said, then can you add that lens and thought, you know, like I guess you put a protective guard over yourself, as you say, you was masking, and then only until the pandemic, like many people find that give a space of like self-reflection. And I guess for then it was like self-reflection where you was like kind of end up taking the mask off, or when able for people to tell you when like the flags of you mask and mirror. And then I guess it became more inescapable of being able to cover up and continue to be seen as, you see yourself as neurotypical and when you're autistic.
Well, and also I think because there is a lot of misinformation online, a lot of the things that I thought was a lot of the things that are actually autism, I'd thought was ADHD. So a lot of the time when I was speaking to like my sister, for example, you know, as I say, she works in research, so she develops like medicines. So she's
Yeah.
working on a trial at the moment that's like a CBD trial. And one of the uses for that is for ADHD. So I'd spoken to her about that, and because I thought that all of the things
Yeah.
that I experienced were a repercussion of my. So yeah, so that's kind of where I guess part of the reason
Yeah.
why I dismissed it.
As you say, it does get quite confusing when you quite multiply neurodivergent. As you said, you're first diagnosed with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and then later on ADD. And I guess when you like get those diagnoses earlier on, then I guess you can think that some stuff is more attributed to those conditions rather being attributed to autism. And then when you got like multiple neurodivergencies, then I guess it becomes quite mindful to navigate through what's what, and do I tick that amount of boxes to be that type of person, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I think, you know, the diagnostic process, at least in my experience, wasn't like I had my assessments, and then you're just like, you know, you're just okay, then you've got your diagnosis and you just set off on your way. So nobody ever sits down and or with me anyway, and have a conversation of like, this is like, even though they'd had the conversations and they'd asked me questions obviously about my life and how I deal with things, and there were certain tasks and stuff I'd had to do, no one had ever said, you doing this is why I think why you've got the diagnosis. So I never knew for a long time really why I had that any of the diagnoses. Like, of course you get your report through and it says Jessie does blah 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 and Jessie is blah blah blah, but you know that it's so much more complex than that. So it's really difficult to know what is what, and then so much shame is attached, because no one says, oh, you know, with ADHD, for example, like you might have brain fog or ADHD paralysis. You don't, you know, you have to do so much research on your own outside of those diagnoses to really understand what that means and what it looks like, especially on an individual basis, because it is so different for everybody.
Yeah, and that's probably what you were saying, it can relate to as well, because like I was diagnosed, a lot earlier than yourself, diagnosed with dyspraxia at the age of like 7 and then autism at the age of 10. But it was only at like 18 when I started to understand what it meant, because like, first of all, like autism was labelled as Asperger's with myself.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it was only from my knowledge I decided to ditch the label, because hearing about like the impact of functional labels and of course the origins of Asperger's and relates to Nazism and like that. So as you say, it's like that's this issue with a lot of it being about the research and the understanding of like a neurotypical person's lens of being neurodivergent, and then because it's not understood, like the diagnosis process, the like signs, traits, and symptoms not set out by neurodivergent person, and it can be quite harder to understand. And then, as you said, especially like when you have that diagnosis, no one like explains things or explains what's not things. So then you kind of think that like you're a bit weird, you're a bit anxious, you never know how to ask for that help or get help.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you had a similar experience, even though you were diagnosed
Yeah,
much earlier. Because I also do think that there's an element of being in school, and like I don't know about your experience personally, but I did experience like bullying and stuff at school, but there was
yeah,
still a safety net around school, if that makes sense. So, it's still, you have a set routine that definitely really helped me, even though like my ADHD hates routines. Having that routine of going to school, and you have the half term,
yeah,
6 weeks holidays, like you kind of know what to expect, and it's like, there's not a lot of change and whatnot. So it's actually, I guess, and there is kind of like a freedom to be yourself and be accepted and to behave a certain way. Then when you go into the adult world or the real world, that kind of changes, and I think that
yeah,
it actually becomes a lot harder. I remember one of my teachers saying to me when I was going through the diagnostic process for dyslexia, dyspraxia, oh, is there really like any point, you're leaving school, you're not thinking of going to university? And at the time I kind of was like, well, I'm not sure if I'll go to uni, so I think I should do it just in case. And I'd always associated having those diagnoses, the importance of it being
yeah,
directly linked to education. But actually, it's like even if you don't go to uni or you don't go to school or whatever, it's still so important, and then
yeah,
probably even more important, because you don't get to 18 and then it stops affecting you. It affects you
yeah.
throughout your entire life.
Yeah, as you said, because you like think of it as being education related, as you say, with dyslexic can be, as you say, typically thought of just difficulty with reading, and then dyspraxia, difficulty with practical tasks. But as you said, because you probably had undiagnosed autism and ADHD and like probably like suffered with anxiety and stuff like that. Well, with the autism and anxiety thing with myself, even though like sometimes in school you do mask and you don't, like, it's a space where you're still not sure who you are and still finding that self, and so you don't really have that freedom to understand yourself. But I understand what you mean when you said about the comfort of the school. You get that routine of like, like not knowing what you're doing day in and day out, and then you don't have to think too much about the future, because then once you finish with like sixth form, and it was easier to transition from comp to sixth form because it's similar type set area, like, and like it was similar set of independence. But when he tried to go to university, only like lasted out 5 weeks, because like it's like like if you haven't, like I was still having trouble get access, not supports right ahead, because like the time with like getting forms right, but it's like it's a big transition, and a transition you don't feel prepared of from when you moving from it, like the world of schooling to the adult world, and that is quite a big thing.
Oh, a massive, massive thing. And I guess that's part of the reason that I'm like so passionate about talking about it online is because that transition is so difficult, and even moving from one workplace to the other, or one home to the next, or one relationship to the next, those kind of things as an adult is really hard, and it's so important that stays in place and people feel confident enough to ask for the support that they're owed, because it is that can be like the deal breaker.
Yeah.
Well, like for me, part of like when I was growing up, I had this like weird thing that I think is really linked. Like, I always never saw my life past 18, and I always kind of like, and it wasn't like in a really sad way, it was just I could only see my life up to 18, and I got to 18 and I was like, oh, okay, I'm here, like, okay, it'll be 21, and I don't know why, but it was like I just had these landmarks that I thought, okay, well, now I'm here, I'm probably going to make it to here, but I couldn't envision that future. I couldn't see. And I think there's two things in it. One of the things is that I can't envision, like I can't imagine things like in my head. When I shut my eyes, I can't see things, I can't picture things at all. So I think part of it is that like I can't, so because I can't imagine it, it's hard to like, because I can't physically imagine this, it's hard to think about. But I think the other part of it is linked to that, you know, when you're in primary school, but next step is secondary school, and when you're in secondary school, you know, next step is formal college. So I think that was really linked to it, of having that routine and that system. And there was something inside of me that knew outside of that I was going to really struggle to function, and maybe I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but inside, like in my gut, I knew, if that makes sense.
And I think with like, you know, when you get to the age of 18, and then you know, like with like when you go through like compound school and whatever, you kind of got like the choices are kind of all laid out for you, and you know, like you don't have to think about what you're doing in the future, and you know what comes next. So that does take a weight off your shoulder a bit, you know, like, and if you can just think about the here and now, that's all easier for a neurodivergent person, because like it is so easy to get overwhelmed by choices, because as you say, the simple choices of what you went for tea, to have for food and stuff like that, that can be very struggled for neurodivergent person. And as you know, like sometimes it's like easier to go for the same options or the safe options, but when you get to the age of 18, when you can choose to go to like, you know, like college, you know, like university and like apprenticeships, jobs, there's infinite amount of options, and it's hard to navigate the right from the wrong then, you know, and you know, being put out there, and you know, like it's get, I think for a neurodivergent person like myself, it can get quite isolating there now of how to navigate that space.
Oh, absolutely, because it's like, I mean, I don't know if you're the same, but I am so adverse to change. Like, I hate change. I cannot deal with it. It gives me anxiety, particularly if it's like more than one change at once. Like if I'm going through like multiple changes, like recently I got a new job and I moved house and stuff, and it was a lot in one go. So there's like the change element, and then like you say, there's the choice, and when you pair the two together, it's so overwhelming, because you've got all these decisions that you have to make, and you don't know, you know, which is the right one to do, and you spend so much time just like overthinking about it, and probably like beating yourself up and having these intrusive thoughts about what if you make the wrong decision. And then there's the actual change element too, which is again, when you're coming out of a routine that you're comfortable with and that you know, really scary and difficult, and often just avoid it. And it's isolating, because even within that, then you've got the other layers that you have to add in. It's a new space that you're not used to. You have to make friends and like or be around people that you don't know, and that's again something that I find so hard. So yeah, it's all of those things.
Yeah, as I was saying, that, you know, like that's something that I struggle with myself, as I found with like something like university, it would have been okay if it was like just the one thing changed on my, just at the one thing, you know, because, you know, when you sometimes like off different things, if it's like a change in one category, then you can work to, you know, adapt to that and kind of think of like small ways around it of to cope. But as like when he was trying to do university, as you say, you got a social changes of new people, and then you got a new environment. But then there's new aspects of like learning and, you know, practical, like theoretical stuff to adapt to. So I think if you got so many different things to navigate, and for a person like myself, I'd struggle to go out with somebody with me. So like it's difficult then if you like you just then, you know, like kind of feel like a big, like a small fish in a big pond then. And that's what sometimes is like.
That's exactly what it is. And you feel like you're drowning.
And do you think like from when you was in like primary school age and throughout secondary school age, was it that, you know, like comfort of like having a sameness and, you know, like less change, you know, in the environment you're in, was it made easier to go undiagnosed as without being diagnosed autistic?
I think yes, but I even though I didn't get diagnosed in primary school, they did identify that there was something different. And I don't know, you know, I never asked the questions why, but I don't know if you had something called golden time when you were in school.
I can't remember.
So it was like this thing at the end of the week on a Friday where you had like, I can't remember how long it was. It might have been like an hour out of learning time where you could just play. And throughout the week, you would have like, if you were naughty, you get a minute off golden time. And then like, you know, then you'd have to sit in a corner and it was punishment or whatever. During golden time, I wasn't allowed to participate because I was pulled into special lessons where it was like, I just had to like, basically I had like an additional teacher that would go over my work with me. And then I had this teacher on lunch times too, like 3 times a week, where I was pulled out and I had like special lessons. And at the time, nobody said to me, we think it's because you're slow or you struggle with this or I can't recall anyone explaining to me why. But the fact that I had to have it suggests that they acknowledged that there was something different or there was something going on. So they did definitely identify it, but I don't know why they never pursued anything further. I think my theory is that because in primary school, I wasn't like naughty, it didn't come out in my behavior. I was just very much like in my own world and kept myself to myself. So even though it was obvious that I was struggling, it wasn't a problem for anyone. Whereas when I got to secondary school, it came out in a different way. Like I would struggle and then the teachers would deal with me and say things like, stop trying to be funny, or stop acting stupid, or stop trying to make the class laugh, and don't ask stupid questions, you know, these kind of comments I wasn't doing at all. And because I wasn't doing it, it would then, or I would ask a question that they would think I was taking the mick or taking the piss, and I'd be like, no, it's a serious question. And I couldn't understand like what it was that they were like getting angry about. So I'd end up getting myself into a lot of trouble because of these kind of things. So I think it then, and then it was like this kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy where I didn't understand, so I'd get fed up because I didn't understand, or I'd get fed up because I was being told off for doing things that I didn't realize were a problem. So I think like the way I dealt with it changed very much so, and I think that's why I started to get, because when I say I didn't get diagnosed until the end of secondary school, they did realize throughout secondary school that again there was something, and no one could really figure it out. And I remember this one woman who was like in secondary school, and I think I was in year 7 at the time, and she acknowledged that there was something but didn't know what. Well, her view on it was that it was OCD. And I remember her saying to my mum, like, well, she's obviously OCD. And my mum, being a nurse, was like, she's absolutely not OCD. I'm a nurse, I'm a mental health nurse. I know the difference, and she's definitely not OCD. And I remember so vividly this woman saying to me afterwards, when my mum wasn't there, I think that your mum's ashamed to admit that you're OCD because she works with people that are OCD. And I knew in my heart that my mum would have accepted me for whatever diagnosis I had. And I trusted that my mum's opinion was right, and that, you know, it wasn't like my mum was trying to stop me from having a diagnosis. It was just she was saying it was wrong. But because this woman had spoke about my mum like this and like made this assumption, it had really left like a bad taste in my mouth and made me distrust her. So from then I'd stopped going to the kind of things that she was sending me to. Then my mum and dad, they tried to get me extra support, so they got me to go to the Mind charity and tried to get me help through there. Sleep is something that I'd really struggled with, and they thought maybe some of my struggles were coming through sleep deprivation, because I've never slept literally since I was a baby. It's always been a big problem. So they thought maybe it was related to sleep. So they then took me to a sleep therapist, and they were actively trying to get me support. It wasn't that they didn't want to admit it, it was just that they just didn't know.
Didn't know the answers and didn't know what to do. Exactly. As you said, from what you described the school, as you're saying, I don't know how many years ago that was, but as you're saying, it seemed like literally then your school experience was that your school teachers and the people that worked in school, they pastoral or, you know, like be supportive people, didn't have a clue of what neurodivergency is whatsoever. And I think like it's one thing is that's so important, is to be able to like get that understood, you know, when you're like a young child throughout, you know, secondary school and primary school. I was saying that, you know, when you were saying that in primary school, you know, when you said about golden time, you said that they had like idea that something was different, but they never told you. And like as you said, something that teachers tend to talk indirectly or like would refer to the parents. But as you were saying, it didn't seem like they understood or have a clue of what ADHD or dyspraxia or dyslexia was.
Yeah.
And as you said, that had a massive impact on your experience of school.
Oh, huge impact. And like, I had some teachers that were awful, but then I had some teachers on the other hand that were amazing. So I had one teacher that, you know, I used to get in trouble for, like, I would stim in class, and I've always, a way that I focus is by whistling or by tapping or by like playing with my hands or playing with my hair or picking my skin. And I would constantly be told off for doing it. And for me, that was helping me to focus. But then the other thing I always was told off for was my facial expressions. And I find it really difficult. My facial expressions don't reflect my face, not my face, but like my emotions. And my teachers would call my mum and say to my mum that I was pulling faces at them and that, you know, I was being aggressive. And I had no idea what they were talking about. And I'll get home and my mum would say, I've had another phone call from your teacher again. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I had no idea. So it made me feel like really resentful to particular teachers that had an impact on that lesson, because I wouldn't want to go, because I wouldn't want to be around them. Whereas on the other hand, I had some amazing teachers who really acknowledged but there was something going on, and you know, would pull me aside. They would adapt how they taught the lesson to help me to understand it. I had an English teacher and I couldn't get Shakespeare for the life of me. The words, everything, it was just so difficult. I find reading really hard as it is. And she would use other forms of poetry like rap music to try and teach me. And she would tell the story in different ways, and like was just really creative with her teaching methods. Or do like one-on-one lessons with me, like at lunchtime, like be like, oh, come in and let me have a chat and help you. Not in like a patronizing way, but a really nice way. And I'm so grateful for those teachers, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have come out with the grades that I did. And it was when I was doing my A-levels, it was actually my drama teacher that suspected, she didn't know, I don't think she suspected what I was, but she was the one that got me my assessment for dyslexia, dyspraxia, because she'd identified something. And it was not until the pandemic where I actually reached out to her to say, thank you. I don't think you know the impact. I emailed her. I don't
Yeah.
know the impact that had on my life. Like, thank you so much. Because if I'd never had that diagnosis, I'd never have had my ADHD one.
Yeah.
Probably would never have then got my autism one either. Like, I would never have started that process. Anyway, I said, what was it that made you? And she said, there were a number of things, but one thing really stood out to me, and she said has always like stayed in her mind, was that I would talk about how long it would take me to have a shower, and the process that I would go through to have a shower. Like, I do everything in a specific order, and how long it would take me to cream my body after having a shower. And she said it was so specific, the way that I would describe it in the order in which I would do things in, but also like, I can't remember what the rest of it was, but it was all around like something completely unrelated to school, but she'd heard me talking about that had been like, that for some reason stuck out in her mind. And I'm glad that it did, because, and I'm glad that she then, you know, reached out to get me that help, because if she hadn't, like I say, I don't think I would have made it through university. And
as you said, you know, like it can be like a pick of the crop when you're in school, you know, like like that one thing is can be quite challenging, and it's like you don't know what type of teacher you're gonna have. And as you said, that for like the teachers who like saw you needed that bit extra but didn't have the answers to what conditions you had, you know, like the importance of being patient and trying to find different ways of like explaining things. And as you said, with your drama teacher, there's a lot of importance in listening to the, you know, like students' behaviours and or like what they're saying, and try to connect it, you know, as you said, you know, like put like them as a person
together.
Sorry?
Like they put the dots together,
Yeah.
within like the things that you're doing in the lesson. It's not just the essay that you're writing, it's what you're saying, how you're saying it, your non-verbal communication, everything, the whole picture.
Yeah, and as like internet, you know, it's not, you know, like important thing about teaching is it's not just like teaching a lesson, but as saying it's about being able to help the student as a person get on their own way in life and like get a good start in life. And that's, as you say, from your drama teaching, being able to have the time and the patience to research, and like as you probably looked things up and, you know, kind of discovered probably through research of own what dyspraxia and dyslexia is. And so what was it like then being having that diagnosis then? And as you say, that regularly contacted your old drama teacher then, what was that experience then?
So that experience then, so I just went through, so she contacted them, and I can't remember how she told me she had, but like all I remember was knowing that she'd spoken to somebody, and then I had to go and have this assessment, and there was lots of tasks and all of this stuff. And then at the end I was given a report, and she said, I'll write this up for you, and you know, this is, I'm giving you a diagnosis of dyslexia, dyspraxia. You're entitled to do your essays, do that extra time with your essay, extra time in exams, and you can have extra support and all of these things. She'd recommended as well that I have like these coloured overlays, because she said it was also Eileen syndrome.
Oh yeah, you'd have like, I saw you do like Eileen syndrome or something like that.
Eileen syndrome, yeah. So she gave me like these coloured overlays. It was really significant to see that so I'd already done my AS levels, in AS and an A level. And in my AS levels for sociology, I got an E. Then I retook it with the extra support and the extra time, having a laptop, being in a room on my own. I got an A. And I didn't work any harder. It was literally not having those distractions, those noises, you know, it was the clock ticking or someone tapping or people walking up and down, being in a space where I wasn't like, didn't have any visual distractions, where I was able to type rather than write. Like, I could not believe it when I got my grades through and I saw that significant jump. So I mean, it definitely helped me in terms of like that, but I would still say, even out like in terms of my actual like exams, it really helped. But I didn't, at that point I still didn't get any support like outside of lessons. It wasn't like I then had somebody come in to help me or anything, which I probably would have really benefited from. I think something that I would have massively benefited from is maybe just having somebody to kind of like talk to and communicate to, because one of my really big struggles with being ADHD is the emotional dysregulation that comes with it. And I was like, I was getting myself into trouble a lot throughout secondary school and my sixth form, and I would lose my temper and I'd chuck chairs and I'd have meltdowns and I'd bang my head against the wall and I would pull my hair out, you know, really dangerous, not just to myself, well, not just to other people, but to myself. Meltdowns that at the time I thought were tantrums, obviously. But had I had somebody support me in learning how to regulate my emotions and looking at different techniques or things that I could do, I think that would have been really life-changing, because they're things that I continued throughout adulthood. You know, I would have regular meltdowns where I would smash things, I would chuck things, I would pull my hair, I'd smash my face against the wall, I would hit myself, like all of these things that are awful. And the only way that I can describe it is like, it feels like in that moment I'm being possessed by something. It's not like I can just stop. It just builds up and builds up and builds up, and sometimes it will come on as like a repercussion of like being really had too much like sensory stimuli. Sometimes it will be because of like an emotional situation, but I just couldn't manage those emotions. And I think that support would have just been so important to me and really helpful, and I think may have also helped the amount of times, you know, I'd thought about not wanting to be here, and you know, all the times I've written like notes to my family because I was like, oh, I'm not going to be here, I'm going to end it all, you know, all of those kind of things. I don't know, but I wonder if I'd had that support, would I have ended up in those places?
Yeah, and as you said, then you know, like that, as I said, going through that without having diagnosis then of ADHD and autism must have been really tough. As I say, I'm just glad I never like experienced that, you know, physical type of, you know, meltdowns. Like for me, I all like looking back now these days, I notice it tends to be looks a bit more like panic attacks. And so like then I think these days being able to look back and thought maybe some of my panic attacks maybe were meltdowns and they weren't able to distinguish from. But as I said, I I'm just grateful that I never had that experience of like remember of like, you know, worrying about the harm that I could cause self. And as I said, that must have been like tough to go through. And as saying that without having like anybody in your life that could like guide you with it, as I said, even though like you had like empathetic and supportive parents who were trying their best for you, but like somebody who was like another neurodivergent person that like could help you in that way.
Yeah, that was really hard. Like I've still got hair like on my arms, and it's not self-harming, like I don't know if you can see it, but like I would I can't twist my arm around, but like I would smash photo albums, photo frames, sorry, and get the glass and just like literally it would be whatever I could do. And it wasn't in that moment like I'm trying to kill myself, but it was like it would like I say, something would just possess me. Like that's the only way I can describe it. It's so violent and horrible, and you just can't control it. And then afterwards there's so much shame attached. I remember having those meltdowns when I was younger, and my dad and mum used to say things like, you're gonna wake the neighbours, it's not fair, you're being selfish, you're distracting people, like you need to pack it in. And now obviously they feel awful, like you know, but because they didn't understand, they're like, you're too old to be having tantrums and behaving like this, like, you know, not recognizing, realizing what it was.
As I said, you probably like, as you said, you'd like then now they feel a bit like guilty for it. And as I said, you know, like it must be like a tough thing, because like as I said, only like now you've been able to get that diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and like as you're saying about then, like the impact of not having a diagnosis can be quite harmful to neurodivergent to themselves, as like it can take so many people's lives away from, like, as say that, like the mental health side of things, as saying that you didn't want to, end it, but like it was just like they were kind of like kind of forced thrusting through your heads and the meltdowns, and I guess because you didn't know how to control the feelings you were feeling, as you felt quite possessed for it. And as you said, like here, like it's like, as you say, sometimes stim, and then sometimes in the meltdowns, like what stimming is, like it can be a bit more harmful.
Yeah, harmful stims for me. I always, when I talk about stims, I say that there are healthy stims and then there are unhealthy.
Yeah. And it's like being able to, and then it's the important thing is being able to find a way of like understanding what's unhealthy or what's healthy, and how you can help a person who's like having unhealthy and harmful stims. And as you were saying about, like, you wanted to be able to have that support of like an extra member of staff that could help with your emotional regulation. And from what I've been talking to like the guests on the podcast and with reflection on this, it's like there is really need for the importance of having like neurodivergent people to be able to like inform like how like things get set out in schools and education system. And like, as I think to myself now, it would be so beneficial to have like a neurodivergent person come into school to like actually teach what is ADHD and autism and these things, and explain it to normalize these things, so like people can understand then and maybe get earlier diagnosis, and for then teachers to start empathizing with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a real challenge though, because the education system now is so flawed.
Yeah.
Teachers are teaching classes of 35 students, which is going to make it impossible for them to recognize and have those one-on-one relationships with pupils. Yeah. So I think, like, I feel for teachers because they need to have that education, but even with that education, it's going to be so hard for them to identify these things, and they've got so many pupils to teach and manage. So I really think that the whole system needs to have a reform, because it affects everyone, doesn't it?
Yeah, as you said, it affects everyone, and that things can extend to like the process and like, or like your health support teams and like your mental health support teams, as they kind of all linked with the school system. And we like, as this like the trait of autism and ADHD both combined, and neurodivergency is like heightened empathy and social injustice. And from the content I see you creating and the stuff you manage to make speeches on, you manage to incorporate like your life experiences, like some of the negative experiences you had, into like making people aware of and trying to make things like easier for change, like to try to change things for the better.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I'm really passionate about. I think that it's really like interlinked with being autistic now and ADHD, like that social justice. Definitely, I think that's probably why I feel it so deeply. I look back at some of the like past elections and being on the phone to my dad and being like, I can't live in this world anymore. Why are people so cruel? Blah, blah. Like, I can't believe that we're going to have this, so many people are going to be going to food banks. What's going to happen to the NHS? Like, distraught, like completely distraught, which of course, like, it's natural, I think, to feel like that, but the reaction was it was like grief. That's the only way I can explain it, is it really felt like grief. But when I look back at my life, and I can really see like how that, even before I had the kind of education or awareness to kind of accompany it, that kind of like social activism has always been like a part of me. So there's this story that my nan always tells about how I'd been at her house and I'd had, me and my friend were there and we were having something to eat, and she walked in and I was talking to her about fascism, and I was talking to her about she mustn't leave her food on the table, leave any food on her plate, because there are children that don't have any food in the world, which I completely disagree with now. You know, you shouldn't force people to eat if they're not, but it was the whole element of like, there are people without anything, we should be grateful. And then in primary school, I used to go around without a coat on at lunchtime when it was raining, and my teacher would say, you need to put your coat on, and then say, no, we need to know what it feels like to be homeless. Homeless people have to live like this all the time. We should have to experience it too. And then one Easter, I refused to eat any of my Easter eggs until I'd stood with my arms out like in a cross for, I can't remember how long, but a certain period of time, because you had to understand what it felt like and what Jesus sacrificed on the cross for us to have these Easter eggs. You know, that need, that kind of very unique way of trying to understand and empathize with people was definitely something. And in secondary school, I would organise protests, and I'd get the whole school out and we'd all sit on the balconies and refuse to go to lessons because it might have been over things like school uniform, or I can't remember the others. Like there was ones around like racial justice, but the school uniform one really sticks out because I remember getting like a new head teacher come in and she tried to change our uniform, and I hated the new uniform because it was like this horrible material and it used to really itch my legs, and like when it got wet it was just the sense of it was horrendous. Before, I'd been wearing a tracksuit to school and I was so comfortable, and I worked really well wearing my tracksuit bottoms, and I was so comfortable, and then all of a sudden, no, you must wear this, this and this, and your skirt must be this long, and I was like, it's sexist, you can't tell us what to wear, people should be able to learn how they're most comfortable. Again, now I realise that so much of that is linked to probably being the fact that I'm autistic.
And as you said, you know, like some of it is like linked to being both autistic and ADHD. As you were saying, from when you was, you know, saying about like the stuff for the cross and all that, I guess it's one of those ways of like taking the empathetic social justice, you know, quite literal way of thinking, as you're saying, because like the symbols and gestures of the cross, of like how like sometimes you can naturally envisage how these things are.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you were like touching me, when it came to your experience of like schooling, as you were saying that some of it was down to like, you know, your sensory needs, your sensory uncomfortness of it. And then, you know, within the school system you described, you know, when that, as you said, some teachers like you really had found it difficult to deal with because, you know, like they didn't have the patience and didn't understand your neurodivergent conditions, and as you said, you supported, and then at that age when you're still young, it's hard to advocate. So I guess it's that impulse then of wanting something to change, then and you're trying to find something creative in yourself just to, you know, find an alternative way of advocating then for yourself.
How did I do it, did you say?
No, I was just saying that, you know, when you were school age, like you weren't able to self-advocate. So being a diverse, having AD, that impulse, that creativity enabled you to enact and decide to do something like the school uniform and protest against it.
100%. I definitely think that's what it is, like thinking outside the box in a different way.
Yeah, as like with being neurodivergent, I think like sometimes there can be two ways of in school, like sometimes can feel like needing to be super obedient, or like fear of being told off, or like doing something wrong, which I kind of felt. And as you described it, there's a way of breaking out of like the kind of like what was supposed to be with the rules, and then finding a way of like what you didn't see as being naturally being fair or, you know, reasonable, like off way of like just like go, you know, protest against it. But as you say, sometimes you do notice like school rules around uniform being like sexist. Like within being neurodivergent, there's different ways of leadership and taking initiatives that can happen. And I guess that's what inspired you to be more politically active now, and like start making these TikTok videos.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I don't think you necessarily realise how linked it is until you like take that moment to like reflect on it and look back.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, because as you say, you need to be able to like understand what you know about yourself now, to look upon your past and put together like where that person and in the moment where you are right now, and can see like all like you kind of like past is kind of linked off, or you're trying to create awareness or create social media content and activism. You're trying to help somebody else, or hope your content or activism help somebody else who's been in a similar position to you, and so they don't experience that negative experience.
Yeah, I think like for me, it's like a mixture of things. Like going online, it's like initially it was a kind of around like that community and not feeling like alone, and like feeling like a sense of comfort from other people relating, and going from feeling so isolated and feeling like you're the only one that experiences these things, to realizing actually there are so many people that do, and it's not abnormal, and there's nothing wrong with you, and you're not a bad person. So there was like that comfort element to it, and the community element, and everyone has been online so lovely and so nice. And it's like a completely different experience to so many people talk about online trolls and stuff, and yeah, you might experience that like a small degree, but on the most part everyone is so supportive. And then it's like you want to educate people, you want to make other people feel how other people have made me feel, and having these conversations about things that are difficult to talk about, and often like shame is so attached to it. But actually when you have those conversations, there might, even if it's only one other person that can relate, and it helps them to feel more normal or feel less alone, it's worthwhile doing.
Yeah, as I say, like social media can be quite nuanced thing, and it's neither one thing or the other. As I said, for myself, social media's like, and the internet has been one of the only ways that I started to understand my neuro from the lens of neurodivergent people, and it's given me quite great power to do that, and to be able to get comfortable talking and then opening up to people. In my own life before that, I might only know like when I do have people who have like a condition same as myself, and then I didn't, because like how I highly masked, I didn't feel as comfortable in opening up and talking to them. But like when you got like see so many different people making content of what neurodivergency is, and having quite an open post, making posts, and you find ways of relating to, it's great way of educating and find, like seeing yourself reflected in what you see online.
Yeah, that's a really big point actually. It's really interesting you say that, because I feel like there is such a lack of representation of us in like the media and stories and stuff like that, and what it is, it's so stereotypical, and actually like the majority of us aren't necessarily like that. So online it's like we're taking back that ownership of actually this is like what we are like, and then being able to kind of relate and like laugh and whatnot, and that relate to those jokes and see ourselves in it. Yeah, I think you're right.
I was saying that from what like we've been able to see before in traditional media, like you'll see one bite-sized bit of it. We can openly tell our stories as it is, and get our stories inside of things out there, as when we like talked about like the diagnostic criteria and stuff like that. A reference how like sometimes it can be like very neurotypical sided onto the view of us, and now it's like an easier way of projecting the view of us out there, because we've got platforms to do and so much different stuff, like you like telling your own story on social media. Some of that being like your chronic illnesses, things like, as I said, racial injustice, or the like social issues you feel passionate about. And as I said, like neurodivergent disabilities. Through your TikTok videos, how I found out about yourself and thought about getting you on podcast. But for anybody who hasn't seen them, like maybe like touch upon what stuff you have talked about on your TikTok?
God, it's so broad. Everything from talking about being neurodivergent, my experiences like throughout my life, my day-to-day experiences, techniques and things that I've found or strategies that I've found helpful, talking about mental health, talking about, like you say, my other chronic illness and disability, so interstitial cystitis, which is to do with the lining of my bladder. So it's like my bladder has like lots of incisions in it kind of thing, and when I wee it bleeds and you don't see the blood coming out, it's all internal. It's of course like very painful, and took me a long time to get diagnosed, and I was having lots of misdiagnoses. Now I'm on a treatment plan that has worked really well, and I'm really lucky, but it took me about 7 years to get to that place. And I do still have flare-ups, which are like usually related to stress. Ironically, I came out of lockdown and I was getting way more flare-ups again, which, you know, I think it's very much linked to navigating a neurotypical society. That kind of stress I think is really linked to it, because when I'm at the worst in my physical health is usually when I'm most stressed. So I talk about that a lot. Endometriosis, which I was diagnosed with when I was, I believe, 18 or 19, which is like when the lining of your womb grows outside of it, and it can cause really like pain, like lots of pain, feeling like tired, heavy periods, etc. So I talk about that, but less so because I'm quite lucky that I'm one of the very few that I've heard of that have got it, but not to like a severe degree. So it used to be much worse, and it's not as bad as it was when I was growing up. So when I say growing up, when I was like in my teen years. So I talk about that, but then I also talk about lots of things around like social issues, anything from like the NHS to homelessness to racial justice, the education system, things that I would like to see changing. Then just more broader things that are just things that I find funny, things that I relate to. So I don't really necessarily, I think, fit into like one niche. I think that's something that I'm trying to make sure that I don't like box myself in too much, because often people think, oh, you're ADHD, you're autistic, you're dyslexic, you're dyspraxic, and that's your whole personality or that's your whole identity. But we're not. We're like normal people that are layered and complex and have interests and passions, and like it's important that we're allowed to show that we are not one-dimensional.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, we've got many different parts of who we are, like everyone else. Like, you try to, like, so many different sided you are as a person on, you know, been trying to mix up with. So, and you were saying about, like, interstitial cystitis, I'm going to say that.
Interstitial cystitis.
You only heard the condition for yourself, creating this content. So, for anyone who isn't aware, could you like give a bit of an explanation of what it is, and maybe if like any signs and symptoms, and when to know when to like get seen about it?
I needed to go to the toilet a lot. I was always needing to wee. Like, I think I was going like a minimum of 10 times a day. I was up throughout the night 3-4 times. So I wasn't sleeping. Obviously, it's difficult to travel. You do often have accidents, which as an adult isn't like the norm. Lots of leakage, but huge amounts of pain, like to the point I'd be lying on the floor like in agony, like I couldn't move, bloating to the point where I looked like I was pregnant, and it would just come on like so suddenly. I would go to the doctors and they would like do tests for like urine, bladder infections, like UTIs, kidney infections, and they would come back as like negative, and I'll be like, well, you can clearly see that something's wrong. Because it was all coming back as negative, they didn't know what was going on. So eventually I was in A&E like on a weekly basis because it was so bad, and eventually my doctor agreed to send me to get a referral. So I did like a few tests, and initially they couldn't find what was wrong, and they sent me to a physio. When I went to see the physio, it was actually her that said, oh, I think it could be this. At the same time I was being tested for MS because they thought it was maybe MS. So she was like, well, wait for your MRI results to come back, and if it comes back negative, I'll speak to the specialist here. That's what they did. And then I had a cystoscopy, I can never say it, basically when they put you to sleep and put a camera in you. And I remember like waking up from the operation, and my doctor came over and she was like, yes, it's confirmed, you've got a really poorly bladder. I remember, like, at the time being so happy that I finally like had that diagnosis, because I'd felt like nobody believed me, even though like it was obviously not good to know that, you know, to hear like, oh, there isn't a cure and you're going to have this the rest of your life and you're going to always have to like have operations and whatnot. Like, it was also just a relief to know. And I remember when they'd said to me they thought it was MS, like I was devastated, like thinking, you know, my life could be cut short and I might like lose mobility in my body and all of those things, and thinking about like losing my independence. I was devastated. So it kind of then put things in perspective to me, because I thought, well, do you know what, like things might be more difficult, but I can still do things, and I want to like make the most of my life. Because like when I thought it was MS and I was thinking, oh, it's going to be over, it really does like make you think about actually how much you do want to be here.
I think sometimes with MS, I think it might not always, like, I'm not 100% sure. Like, when I was conditions, it wouldn't be too sure whether it affect your, like, lifespan. As I said, won't count on it. But, like, as I say, there, like, you probably at the time when you was getting seen, like, there's so much, like, you was uncertain of and wasn't sure of, and the diagnosis of, and you said, and I think you probably found yourself being a bit relieved, as I said, even though it's, as I said, it's incurable now, then you know, at least you thought then you could have like some sort of treatment and like something way off, like not end up in going to A&E every week. And so I think probably that was the most probably frustrating thing, is being A&E is constant with, you know, like carousel of like where we felt like having like a serious health thing, and then not having the answer ready for you.
Yeah, it was. And like being able to kind of take control of my life again, because so many of my weekends were gone because I was spent there, or evenings, and it was just that like that bit of hope, like I can start to get things like my life back a little bit.
And I guess probably you found since you started speaking about this on TikTok and social media, because it's a health issue that, as you said, I wasn't aware of, and I guess many people weren't aware of, and I guess that play a, you know, positive impact just by talking about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I'd never heard of it before, and even still, so many doctors, like if I have to go into the doctors for something else and they say, have you got any other conditions, and whenever I say that, they're like, what's that? And I remember after one of the treatments I had is Botox for it, and I'd had the Botox and I had to go back into hospital, and they said, oh, have you had an anesthetic recently? And I said, yeah, I have, because I had my Botox, my bladder. And they're like, for what? Botox on your bladder? What? That's a weird cosmetic treatment. It's not cosmetic. I've got interstitial cystitis. They were like, what's that? And I'm thinking, this is a doctor that's like 50, 60 years old and has no idea. So even within like the healthcare profession, there's still such a lack of education. So it's still relatively new, or in its infancy in terms of education. And it's only through talking about it. And it is one of those conditions that, you know, primarily affects women. Unfortunately, women's healthcare is very under-researched and underfunded. So it is down to those of us in that community to talk about it.
And as you said, like doctors, thing is, as you say, nowadays you've not been able to get like a quick referral, because, as I said, then if you like go like slow referral, general practice, and I wouldn't been able to like have the understanding of other conditions, as you say, lack of funding and understanding and awareness. I guess you, as you say, not even like an endometrial condition you said you have, it's like getting a bit talked about a bit more now. But as you, like it's still said about, still like an acute rate for it, and as you would probably found out of yourself, there's a lot that GPs and other medical professionals don't understand about it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with endometriosis, I was so lucky because I went in at 18, and the first person that I saw turned out to be like one of the leading specialists in the UK. In that instance, I was like incredibly, and that wasn't intentional, it just happened to be who was there at the time. In that regard, I've been very lucky. But then in like the other regard, you know, that whole process of waiting, and not knowing, and the gaslighting that you go through, people saying you're too young, there's no way, and I'm like, I'm not making it up, like this, I'm not lying.
It's like the idea of like a young person's mental physical health, and as you were saying, like health conditions that like typically affect women more. So with that as you said, that's hugely misunderstood. And then as you said, you got gaslighted then, and that's something that does need to be changed. And as you said then, it's about being able to like get more talked about a bit more, so there's a bit more understanding.
Yeah, definitely. That's why and it's not comfortable to talk about, and you do often feel like a level of shame, especially with things that are like more intimate. Even though we're all grown-ups, it's still not like most people don't like talking about things like their bladder or their bowels, like it's just not socially acceptable for whatever reason. But we do need to talk about these things, we do need to have these conversations, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. We shouldn't be holding this shame. The longer that we attach shame to it, the more likely it is that people are going to suffer in silence.
Especially, and I think, like as I said, it's like important to have like these conversations, because like open by doing this can start to raise education. Because one thing I found from this podcast, it's been good to like learn from other people, about the areas of knowledge and their life experience. And like as I said, this is a taboo subject, but as you say, it's something that I found affects a lot of autistic and neurodivergent people, a lot of chronic health conditions.
I have a theory that it's like the stress of masking that can have that effect on the body. It's just a theory, but that's my theory.
I'd say it would be interesting to know what like the reasons behind it, because I'll see there's many different chronic health conditions, like a year of like hypermobility and understand loss linked to like law diagnosis within autism. And then I'd say it is quite curious what the reasons are, and what links are. And as you say, like for you, like some of your physical health has been due to the stresses for stuff, and I could understand that we could be related then getting out of the period of the COVID lockdowns and the area of the pandemic.
I've looked online to see like if I can find research into it, and there really isn't like anything. So I think it's definitely something that needs to be more.
You find is like, because like not many newer people have been able in the past to ask the questions, and so it's important that they're given the chance to research and understand these things, and like understand these things a lot more.
Yeah, completely agree.
What have you found like the impacts of sharing your life story out from TikTok, and have you found people contacting you and saying how like much it's impacted them?
Yeah, it's been really like heartwarming actually, and you saying that's just reminded me there's someone that messaged me and I completely forgot to reply. But a lot of people being like, thank you, you've really helped me to understand myself and to remove like the shame, and because of like that content, it's helped them to get a diagnosis or to be open with their family. And it's just so like heartwarming and rewarding to have that impact, and really like humbling, because it just feels like a big like responsibility, but also like such a privilege to be able to do that and to have that impact on people's lives. It's been like really like life-changing for me as well as them. And I just feel like when they say thank you to me, I just think like, well, that's a shared thank you. Like, I'm so grateful, because if they didn't watch my content and comment and say, oh, I relate to this, or I understand this, or this is my experience, like I wouldn't feel as comfortable in my own skin. Like it's definitely a two-way thing. It's not just me trying to help others. Like I get just as much from it, I think, as other people get from me.
Exactly, that's what I found from like starting to do this podcast, because you start to feel a bit more confident in talking about these experiences. And because like if you're hearing from other people who like experience different things they relate to, and chatting to people with like said experiences, even though everyone's experiences are different, you feel a bit like your experiences have been more normalized, as you feel less lonely in it.
Oh, absolutely, way less lonely. You feel way less like isolated, and you feel less like an alien.
Before your diagnosis, doing the social media content, that's kind of how you like kind of previously felt like, and that can be the thing for some people. So I'm glad that you've been able to, at a point there where you can start to feel things turning around, you got more hope for yourself.
Yeah, so much more, like for the first time in my life, which is just it sounds really like soppy or cheesy, but I really do think it's changed like my life for the better, and I feel like the healthiest, the happiest I've ever felt. I don't think if I'd like looked back 10 years ago I would have ever thought that I would be able to feel how I do now. So yeah, I feel really grateful. There's a part of me that feels angry and resentful, but I didn't know earlier. But also in hindsight, maybe if I had, I wouldn't be doing this now. Do you know what I mean? So it's like everything does happen for a reason, and it works out in a way like I am still here, and hopefully I can help other people.
When you look back on your past, there's a whole load of mixed emotions, because as I said, I understand how you can feel a bit angry and resentful as you like more having a diagnosis earlier. But then, as I said, you're grateful being able to create something from your past experiences and manage to find a way of like from like something negative to positive. And then please you being able to do that for yourself.
Yeah, so pleased.
Because like from what you've gone through, it's like you deserve to have like something where you can see things turning around.
We all do, though. Mine isn't a unique experience at all. I think we all share so many of the same experiences, and it always blows my mind whenever I see something and I'm like, I thought that was unique to me. Like, how have we gone through exactly the same thing? So I think that we're all deserving of it. And I guess that's like what kind of does drive me, is wanting other people to understand that they're deserving of it too, and to not feel angry at themselves or ashamed or guilty or any of those like really destructive emotions or feelings, so that they can be like healthier and happier.
You're absolutely right. One thing I want people to take away from this podcast, the one thing that people may not know about being neurodivergent, disabled or chronically ill.
That I don't want to be changed. We don't want to be changed. We just want society to change. There's nothing wrong with us. Our brain just works differently. The problem is with society and how society is structured. And actually, there is just as many, pretty much, of us as there is of them. And why should their brain and way of thinking be prioritized? We all have something really unique to offer and our own like perspective that is just as valuable, that can be accommodated, and we should be accommodated. And I think that like I've really struggled with is asking for accommodations, and being able to ask for accommodations is so important. So basically do it, like don't feel ashamed and don't feel like you don't deserve it or have imposter syndrome because you don't have a wheelchair or a walking stick. Your disability is still valid. And like, because of the fact that the world isn't built to accommodate us, so you have to take all of those accommodations that are there, because if you don't, then no one will.
If you could change one thing in the world for disabled or neurodivergent people,
I think a lot of it would be around like the diagnostic process. I think that it should be a lot easier. I don't think that there should be wait lists. I think everybody should have access to diagnosis and as quickly as possible. I think that everybody should be tested at least twice, once at primary school and once at secondary school, to ensure that nobody slips through the net. I think that once you get a diagnosis, that you should have clear plans written up, that you should have like check-ins on a yearly basis to see what needs to be changed and how those kind of like plans and support can fit in with your life at that point. I think that we shouldn't have to ask for accommodations at work. I think that they should just be like a given. Like, it shouldn't be like, can I have permission to not sit by a printer or wear headphones? It's just, I think that like, why should we have to ask? I just think that's out like crazy. I don't think that we should have to, like when we start a job, that they shouldn't be able to ask you prior to starting the job if you've got any disabilities, because obviously it can then be held against you and weaponized, and you can be discriminated against. There needs to be more protection.
It's been more understanding and listening to the needs of what disabled people need in the workplace for school aids. It's about also like making sure that you've got that peer support, neurodivergent people able to like listen and understand other neurodivergent people, so that understanding is there and the support that can be offered in that. And like the check-ins then, as you said, annually, and those are quite good ideas. And is there anything else you wanted to say that you haven't got to say yet?
I guess like the two things I'd say is like, just for people, like for me, exercise has been like a huge medicine. Like it really, like, never underestimate the benefits of it. I think because I was so shit at sport, because I have no coordination to balance, I really stayed away from any form of kind of exercise outside of swimming because I wasn't good at it. But it's not about being good at it. It doesn't matter whether you're good at it or not. Like the health benefits for your mind and for your dopamine production and for your sleep are huge. So that's definitely something that people can do to like help themselves, and to do things that you enjoy. Like, and it's not like, we live in a world where people want to monetize every hobby that they have. Do things because you like it, because it brings you joy and it gives you pleasure, because you have to create that dopamine for yourself. Because if you don't, that's when you start chasing like unhealthy forms of dopamine and develop things like addiction and whatnot. That's like probably the two kind of pieces of like, I guess, advice that I would give.
Like if you're not like great or the best of it, like if you just like starting what you're best physically capable of, even like if it's starting out with a sort of like as yourself, like I found that myself, like I never been great at like sports or swimming, and one thing that I always enjoyed is like having like when I was stationary as like a gym equipment. So I was going them in the pandemic and having that in the house is just one good thing to have.
Yeah, TikTok is probably where like I spend most of my time, which is JESSESPINX, I believe.
Yeah.
I never remember. I've had like different handles across all of my channels, so yeah, I always forget.